Hi everyone, my name is Justin Pate, owner of the Wrap Institute, and welcome to the fourth installment of our free video series that we're calling Wrapping in Place. And today you're going to learn how to wrap a flower pot. Just a few minutes ago this was a boring white standard flower pot, and with a little bit of wrapping material, some tips and tricks, and some basic tools, you can transform it into something very tropical. It's almost like a staycation. A lot of us might not be able to go on vacation this summer or go to the tropics. Why not bring the tropics to your balcony or backyard? And wrapping is a great way to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You're going to pick up a lot of good tips and tricks. So let's get to it. So we are now ready to wrap the flower pot, and I think it's really important in wrapping in place to get your refreshments in order first. Very important. I know you want to get to wrapping, but you want to get your candy and coffee, in my case, ready, or your chips and juice, because wrapping in place is just about having fun and learning. So not super serious. This is not wrapping for a client. This is just about picking up new tips and tricks. So once you got your refreshments ready, really important, now we get into the wrapping part, and I think it's really important to break it up into three sections. You have prep, install, and post. So for me, prep for a flower pot, what does that involve? It involves getting your tools ready. The tools that you'll need are a standard squeegee, a light duty utility knife that you can snap off the blades, and you always want to snap them off into a safe box. Cleaners in this case, you want to, because we're wrapping plastic, you want to raise that surface area up as much as you can. So this is a standard wrap cleaner. If you don't have that in your house, you can use isopropyl alcohol. That works as well. Scissors for cutting the material safely, so you don't use your knife, because that can be dangerous around your couch. We're going to be cutting directly on the surface, so I'm going to show two ways to do it. One is with 3M knifeless tape, which is great. Another one is, if you don't have that, this is what's called trimline tape. And you can also use masking tape, but trimline tape is really nice. And what that does is it keeps your blade from going too deep. And we're also going to use a hair dryer in this case. Normally I use a heat gun, but heat guns can maybe damage or get too hot around in your house. So a hair dryer is perfect for wrapping in place. So once we have our tools, set, and these are the tools that I highly recommend for this, is you want to think about what you're wrapping and what you're going to encounter when you wrap. So think about it before you go to install. And in this case, I see a big curve down here at the bottom section here, and I know the material wants to bunch up here. So I think about it ahead of time. And that's why you want to think about that ahead of time in terms of what type of material you choose. So in this case, we use two different types of material today. The blue one is a color change material, and this is primarily used for vehicles. This is around 3.3 mil thick, and it's cast, so it's very conformable, and that's why I chose it for the base layer, because I know I'm going to be putting that around that curve at the bottom. If I used a thicker film, like this interior film, and this is what I made the palm trees out of, that might have not worked because it was too thick and too stiff to be the base layer. So you always want to choose the right material that's going to handle the curves and put the one that's thicker and stiffer on the flatter section. So you really want to think about that ahead of time, because if you get that prep right, then when you get to install, which is about what we were about to get to, then it makes the install flow really, really well. So again, got the shape, I figure out where it's going to bunch up, I choose the right material, I got my tools, and I got my coffee and candy. So with that, the prep is done. Let's get to install. When cleaning, it's always a good idea, especially if you're using a stronger cleaner, like in this case a wrapper cleaner, this one's from AV Dennison, is to spray directly on the microfiber towel instead of in the air so you don't breathe any of the mist. Now with the flower pot cleaned, it's time to cut out the shape. Now keep in mind that this has a curve, especially at the bottom, so it means that the material is going to kind of shift up as you go around the curve. So you want to make sure you don't cut this like a rectangle, you want to cut it as a curve. So what I'm doing is I'm rolling the flower pot out, and it naturally curves on the liner, and then I mark it with a dry erase marker so that I know the shape, so I can kind of adjust to it as it goes. And then I cut extra on top. That's called bleed. So I know the marks are basically the shape of the flower pot. Then I cut extra top and bottom. And now here, this is where I begin. So I'm actually going to cut it straight with scissors so I don't have to use a knife. And speaking of using a knife, I'm going to cut the material short top and bottom. That's because I'm wrapping on plastic, which has what's called low surface energy, which means that it's hard for the material to stick for the long term. So I'm going to cut it short and then put a piece of material on top that's going to hold it. I'll show that later in the video. So here, because I'm cutting it short directly on the surface, I'm using 3M knifeless tape right here. So this is called design line. If you don't have knifeless tape, not a big deal, as I mentioned earlier. Here I'm using that trim line tape. And basically what this is just basically thick tape. I'm going to wrap the material over it, and then I'm going to cut with my knife on the trim line tape, which will, because of the thickness, keep my blade from touching the flower pot. Really cool. So with everything set in terms of knifeless tape or trimline tape, and I got the shape of the panel ready, now it's time for install. Now this can be a little tricky, so it's all about super focus right now and how I do it. I'm going to basically lock it in at one point and don't have to start exactly anywhere, specifically on the flower pot. So basically just choosing one section. And then here I'm running knifeless tape again, and the reason for this is when the piece wraps over, that's called the overlap, I want to make sure I cut it off safely. So I don't want to use my knife because I might cut too deep. So knifeless tape is really good and safe for that. And I highly recommend now, because it's a fairly long piece, is rolling it up nice and tight. And that means I can hold on to it and actually pull. So I only want to release a little bit of the liner at a time because of the curve. So I'm using a hair dryer now, and then I pull. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that when I pull after this first one, just to lock it in, I'm going to pull in what I call a triangle technique. So I'm going to pull towards the bottom first. So I pull at a 45-degree angle low and away. Once I lock that, I'm going to shift it. I'm going to heat it again, and then I'm going to pull 45 degrees up and away. So you can see me heating it right now. Not a super high setting on the hair dryer right now, just enough to warm it. And then I pull up to the right. So once I pull up to the right, it shifts. So you always, on a curve, want to shift it 45 degrees in either direction. That's what I call triangle technique. So I pull low and down, lock it in there, and working in baby stages right now. As I mentioned earlier, only pull about 3 or 4 inches of the liner and then pull up and away. And that's why rolling it into a tube kind of acts like as a handle. And only at the end, right when you get to that bottom layer that you began with, you can take the liner off, give it a kiss of heat, spread that material out in that triangle shape, lock it in with a squeegee stroke. You can see the triangle shape in the wrinkles right there. So you pick it up, heat it, and that tells you where to pull, spread it out, lock that upper corner, and then bam, squeegee stroke it down. And you can see that nice good shape of an overlap there. Give it a burst of heat so the adhesive really sticks on that base layer right there. And now you're good to go. Double check the edges, top and bottom, to make sure that there's no wrinkles. But if you do that correctly and you spread the material out evenly as you go, the bottom and top sections should be very flat. Now release the knifeless tape right where the overlap is. Very safe cut, there's no chance of going too deep. Once you pull out the green tape of the knifeless tape, give it a squeegee stroke to lock it in. And at the top, release the knifeless tape as well. So this is cutting the material short, so you're going to see white when I'm done. And again, doing this because the surface energy of the flower pot, because it's plastic, is low. So it's very important to cut this away. If you take the blue all the way to the top, the chance of getting fingers and wrinkles over time is very high. So release the green from the knifeless tape so you get that negative gap space, and we'll fill that in later with mold and hold. So once the top is set now, you can see that negative gap, very important for long-term durability. And to fill that gap in now, I'm going to use a cool tip and trick right now that I picked up in Australia while teaching a workshop. You take the old liner from a piece of wrapping material, fold it, and then you put the mold and hold inside, so it's like a little sleeve. Put your knife down and hold the knife down on a safe cutting surface, and then pull the mold and hold through. So it's a very quick, easy way to split it exactly into the width that you want, because the mold and hold was a little too thick for me as it came out of the box, so I wanted a thinner strip. So the trick right now is putting half the mold and hold on the wrap film, in this case the blue, half on the plastic of the flower pot, and then very important to come back and heat to activate the adhesive. So the mold and hold is basically getting full coverage in terms of the wrapping film on the white, but it's also holding any tension in the blue. So with everything set in terms of the blue as the base layer, it's now time to put those gold palm trees on. Super cool and exciting. So I went to Shutterstock, found a vector image that I liked a lot in terms of palm tree shape, so I'm just going to go off that. And I hope you're learning a lot so far in the video, but don't forget the number one rule of wrapping in place is having fun. So don't forget your refreshments. So in my case, a little candy, a little coffee, got the music going. And now taking the dry erase marker and just drawing out that shape. I always like to use a dry erase marker here as opposed to, let's say, a permanent marker, in case the dry erase marker goes off the paper right now. I don't want it to stain anything in the house, so that's why dry erase markers are super cool. So just going to do a 360 right now, just kind of going off that, connecting the dots essentially. Once I feel like I got the palm tree shape and it's looking pretty good, clicking the blade, and obviously here cutting directly on the surface. So I grabbed the cutting board from the kitchen. And again, because I'm wrapping in place, if you're at your wrap shop, obviously you work on the work table. But very important to just get a nice good rhythm here. So notice I'm going towards the tip of the fronds right now, and I just cross over my cut marks so I don't come up short, because when I pull the excess material away, I don't want to tear. This particular material is really fragile. So here, just shifting the panel as I cut. So just always making sure you're cutting in a comfortable position, and again, keeping that blade super sharp. Always clicking into a safe box, especially when you're wrapping at home. Especially if you have kids around, you do not want them to come across those spare loose blades. That can be very dangerous. So very important to click it into a safe box. Otherwise, click again to old wrap material, fold it up nice and tight, and put it immediately in the trash. Now, did the full 360, everything's cut out and good to go. Carefully pull that excess material out, especially when you're doing like tight point shapes. Now the excess material comes off and bam, tropics are in Amsterdam. Super cool. So very important to think about surface energy in terms of the plastic of the flower pot, but also satin material has a low surface energy as well. So as an installer, you always want to think about surface energy. So I clean it with the degreaser, come back over with the hairdryer, make sure it's nice and dry, so prepping the surface so everything sticks for the long term. And note that I'm putting the first palm tree over the overlap on the blue. And the reason why I'm doing that is in case there's any tension on that top piece. If I don't put anything over that overlap, it might lift up over time. But this palm tree is nice and strong, it's flat, there's no tension. So by putting it over the overlap, it's going to hold any lifting potential long term with that overlap on the blue. So with the first palm tree set, always want to use heat just to make sure everything sits down nice and clean. So again, got the hairdryer, super safe for wrapping in place. And so with all the palm trees set on the blue, I'm going to cut off the excess film at the bottom. So this means I'm cutting directly on the flower pot. I have the trim line tape down there, but if you've never cut directly on anything, I highly recommend blowing up a balloon, a Wrap Institute balloon if you have one, taking a scrap piece of material and cutting directly on the balloon. And the trick is to keep the blade angle at 10 degrees, because if you peak it, the balloon pops. So you don't want to peak the blade, you always want to keep it at 10 degrees when you cut directly on the surface. That trim line, that blue tape that I put on at the beginning, is really helping the blade not go too deep, but you always still want to keep that blade angle at 10 degrees. All that excess film comes off. Now you got an exposed white section just like at the top, and here again, mold and hold goes half on the wrap film, half on the white surface, so it holds any tension at the bottom. And then I come around with the hairdryer, heat it, activate the adhesive, and let's look at the final result of the super cool tropical flower pot. It looks even better outside, repotted, and just a few minutes ago it was boring white, and now by the power of wrap, it's now customized with that tropical feel. Awesome stuff. So I hope you picked up a lot of good tips and tricks in this free Wrapping in Place series from the Wrap Institute. And if you get the bug for wrapping, I highly recommend getting a membership and learning even more. Thanks for watching. Justin Pate.